The meeting was worth $900 million. Every person in that room wore a suit that cost more than a month of Andre Bellamy's salary. And then Andre walked in work boots, safety uniform, grease still under his fingernails, and dragged an empty chair from the corner of the room. He placed it directly at the executive table, right next to the CEO. The room went silent for 2 seconds. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. One vice president picked up his coffee and set it on the seat like Andre had just handed him a cup holder. Andre looked at him calmly and said, "Don't put anything on that chair." More laughter. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a paper towel, and wiped the seat clean without another word. Weeks later, Camille Sterling went back to the maintenance floor alone, flipped that chair over, and what she found written underneath made her cry until sunrise. If you've ever felt invisible in a room where decisions were being made about your life, stay with this story. And if it moves you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Every morning, Andre Bellamy woke up at 4:47 a.m., not because of an alarm, because that was the time his father Samuel used to leave for work, boots on, thermos in hand, the front door clicking shut so quietly it never woke anyone. Andre had been hearing that sound in his sleep for 30 years. Now he was the one making it. He was 42 years old, a field maintenance technician for Sterling Gridworks, one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in the South. His job didn't come with a nameplate or a parking spot near the entrance. It came with a worn tool belt, a faded work uniform, and a company truck with a cracked side mirror that facilities had been promising to fix for 8 months. Every day he drove that truck out to substations, relay points, and aging transformer units that executives only ever saw as line items on an asset report. He checked what needed checking. He fixed what needed fixing. He wrote up what needed to be replaced before it killed someone. Most of those write-ups sat in a queue for weeks. He lived with his 9-year-old daughter, Maya, in a 2-bedroom house 20 minutes outside the city. The house was small but clean. The yard had a tire swing that Andre had hung the summer after her mother left, back when he decided that if it was going to be just the two of them, he was going to make sure Maya never once felt like something was missing. Most nights he succeeded. Some nights he wasn't sure. There was one thing in the house that had never changed since Maya was old enough to notice it: an empty chair at the kitchen table. It sat across from Maya's seat, never moved, never used. When she was 6, she had asked him why they didn't put it away. Andre had set down his fork and thought about how to answer. "That's a seat for the people we don't get to forget," he told her. She had looked at it for a long moment, then went back to eating her cereal. She never asked him to move it. The chair had belonged to his father. Samuel Bellamy had spent 23 years as a lineman for an earlier version of the same company, before the acquisitions, before the rebrand, before the glass towers replaced the old brick dispatch office on Route 9. He was the kind of man who could tell by sound alone whether a transformer was running clean or building toward failure. He taught Andre everything he knew about electrical systems, not from a manual, but from walking beside him on job sites from the time Andre was old enough to carry a toolbox. Samuel died on a Tuesday in October, a relay station in the South District. The cooling system had been flagged for inspection 4 months earlier. The inspection never happened. The failure did. The investigation afterward used the phrase, operational oversight. No one was disciplined. The project that had been prioritized over the inspection was completed on schedule. Before Samuel died, he used to tell his son, "When the people with the least get left out of the room where decisions get made, you hold a seat for them. Because if nobody holds it, they'll forget those people exist." Andre had never forgotten. Camille Sterling had been CEO of Sterling Gridworks for 14 months. She was 38 years old and had spent the better part of a decade earning the right to sit in that chair, fighting through an industry that didn't hand positions like hers to women learning to outwork, outthink, and outprepare everyone in every room she entered. She wasn't the kind of leader who coasted on charm. She was the kind who read every financial report before the meeting and asked the question no one else had thought to ask. She wasn't a bad person. She believed genuinely that running a tight, efficient solvent company was itself a form of protecting people. because a company that failed took thousands of jobs down with it. She had seen it happen to other firms. She had no intention of letting it happen here. But she had also spent 14 months surrounded by spreadsheets, investor calls, and board presentations. The gap between what those documents described and what was actually happening on the ground, that gap had quietly widened without her noticing. The project on the table that morning was the largest of her tenure. A full infrastructure overhaul of the energy grid across 3 southern states, partially automated, projected to take 18 months and cost just under $900 million. It would modernize aging systems, reduce operational costs, and position Sterling Gridworks as an industry leader heading into the next decade. If it worked, her name would be on the cover of every trade publication in the country. She needed it to work. Grant Voss, her VP of Operations, had been the engine behind the project from the start. Grant was 61, gray-haired, built like someone who had once done physical work and never quite let his body forget it. He had been with the company for 20 years through 2 near bankruptcies, 1 federal audit, and a hostile takeover attempt that he had personally helped fight off. He was not a warm man, but he was a loyal one, and he had a kind of institutional memory that no consultant could replicate. Grant believed in the project the way he believed in most things he'd chosen to stand behind completely, and with a certainty that didn't leave much room for doubt. He had run the numbers himself. He had reviewed the risk assessments. In his mind, the people who raised concerns about the timeline were the same people who always raised concerns about every timeline. And if you waited for everyone to feel comfortable, nothing ever got built. That wasn't cruelty. That was 20 years of hard experience. Or so he told himself. Andre had been called into the executive meeting for one reason. A section of the proposal involved legacy wiring configurations in the southern substations. And someone on the technical committee had flagged that field-level input was needed before the board signed off. He was given 15 minutes. He was told to answer questions only, not to offer commentary. He walked into the glass conference room on the 31st floor in his work uniform. He had considered changing. He decided not to. These were the clothes he wore when he was doing his actual job, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The room was full of people in expensive suits talking about optimization curves and accelerated deployment schedules. Andre took a seat near the back and waited while they finished their slides. Then, on the 3rd slide from the end, he saw it. A small line, almost incidental, buried under a section titled Project Readiness Checklist. Field worker consultation pending. Not completed. Not in progress. Pending. He knew what that meant. It meant the box hadn't been checked yet. It meant the people who actually worked inside these stations, who knew which units were running hot, which switchgear was past its service life, which sections of line should not be pushed to increased load capacity, those people had not been formally consulted. And the board was 45 minutes away from approving the next phase anyway. Andre had seen the internal reports from the Southern crews. He had read them himself, passed them along, added his own notes. The warnings weren't vague. They were specific. Particular stations identified by number. Particular risks described in plain language. Particular requests for additional inspection time before any load testing began. He had submitted his own report 7 weeks ago. He had received 1 automated confirmation email and nothing else. He sat in that chair and looked at the slide and felt something settle in his chest, a quiet, cold clarity that he recognized. It was the same feeling he'd had the morning after his father died, standing in the kitchen looking at that empty chair, understanding for the first time what it actually meant to be left out of a room. He stood up. He walked to the corner of the conference room. He picked up an empty chair that had been stacked against the wall and carried it to the executive table. He placed it directly beside Camille Sterling's seat. The room stopped. "Before anyone signs anything," Andre said, and his voice was level, "I want to put this chair here. It's for the people out in the field right now, the ones who weren't invited into this room but are going to live with whatever gets decided in it." 2 seconds of silence. Then someone exhaled a laugh. Then several people laughed. Grant Voss, seated 3 chairs down from Camille, picked up his coffee mug and set it on the empty seat with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been asked to leave a room. Andre looked at him. "Don't put anything on that chair." Grant smiled the way men smile when they're not really smiling. "We're here to approve a project, son, not hold a memorial service." Andre didn't respond. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a folded paper towel, and wiped the coffee ring off the seat. He did it slowly. He did it completely. He folded the paper towel when he was done and put it back in his pocket. Camille Sterling watched all of this and said nothing. But something about the way he cleaned that chair, not angry, not performative, just careful, landed somewhere in her chest that she couldn't immediately identify. She filed it away and moved on. "Mr. Bellamy," she said, "I'll need you to step out. We'll call you back in for the technical questions." Andre picked up his hard hat from the table. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned around. He looked directly at Camille. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "that chair isn't against you. It's just to remind everyone in this room that not being allowed through the door doesn't make a person's life worth less than the people sitting inside." Nobody responded. The silence lasted long enough to mean something. Then Grant said quietly but firmly, "Security can escort him out if needed." Camille raised a hand. "That won't be necessary." She kept her eyes on the papers in front of her. "Mr. Bellamy, thank you for your time." The project moved forward to the next phase. Andre was issued a temporary suspension pending a review of his conduct. He cleaned out his locker in the maintenance bay that afternoon. Most of his colleagues kept their distance, not because they disagreed with him, but because they couldn't afford to be associated with someone who had just embarrassed the executive floor. He understood. He didn't hold it against them. He was almost done when an older technician named Walter, who had worked alongside Samuel Bellamy 22 years ago and never talked about it, walked up quietly and set something on the bench beside him. It was Samuel's old hard hat, faded yellow, dented on the left side with a strip of electrical tape along the brim. Andre didn't know Walter still had it. He picked it up. Inside the crown in Samuel's handwriting, still clear after all these years, "Don't ever let them speak your pain for you." Andre stood there holding it for a long time. He had walked into that room thinking he was trying to protect a project timeline. He understood now that wasn't it. He was protecting something older than that. Something that had been sitting at his kitchen table for 30 years, waiting to be carried somewhere it could finally be seen. He put the hard hat in his bag, picked up his box, and walked out to his truck. The suspension didn't come with a timeline. That was the part Andre hadn't anticipated. Not the suspension itself, but the open-endedness of it. Pending review meant it could be 3 days or 3 months, and no one in HR seemed particularly motivated to clarify. In the meantime, his access badge was deactivated, his work assignments were redistributed, and his name was quietly removed from the field rotation schedule. Word traveled fast in a company with 4,000 employees. Within 2 days, most people who knew Andre knew what had happened. Within 4 days, most of them had decided the safest response was to say nothing. A few managers' men he had worked alongside for years stopped making eye contact in the parking lot. One team lead, who had personally thanked Andre 3 months ago for catching a wiring fault that could have caused a serious injury, now walked past him at the gas station without a word. Andre noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He understood the math people were doing. They had mortgages. They had families. They had their own versions of Maya at home, and they weren't wrong to protect them. What was harder to absorb was what was happening inside his own house. He had been careful with Maya. He kept his voice even when he talked about the suspension, told her it was a work disagreement that would get sorted out, that everything was fine. Maya was 9 and perceptive in the way that children of single parents often are, quietly absorbing information she wasn't being given directly. He noticed she had stopped asking for the brand of cereal she liked. She didn't make a production of it, she just stopped asking. One morning he came downstairs and found her scraping the last of a generic bag into her bowl without complaint. Another morning he saw that she had left the larger half of the bread on his plate and taken the smaller piece for herself. He sat down across from her and stared at that piece of bread for a long moment. Maya looked up at him. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Eat your breakfast." He could take the professional embarrassment. He could take the sideways looks and the managed distance from people he'd worked with for a decade. What he could not take, not cleanly, not without it costing him something, was watching his 9-year-old daughter quietly recalibrate her wants to match their tightened circumstances. She wasn't complaining, she was just adjusting. And there was something in that silent adjustment that cut through every professional principle he had, straight down to the place where he was just a father trying to make sure his kid didn't go without. He sat with that feeling. He didn't let it change his mind, but he sat with it. On the 31st floor, Camille Sterling was trying not to think about a paper towel. She was not the kind of person who got derailed by symbolic gestures. She had built her career on the ability to separate emotional noise from operational reality, to make clear decisions under pressure without letting sentiment cloud her judgment. That skill had served her well. It had gotten her this far, but the image kept returning. Andre wiping that seat clean. Not with anger, not with any kind of performance, just carefully. The way you'd clean something you were trying to preserve. She told herself it was irrelevant. She went back to the project files. That was when she started noticing the language. She had read these reports before, or she thought she had. But reading them now after that meeting, she found herself stopping on certain phrases that had passed through her eyes without registering the first time. A field assessment from the Southern District described a transformer unit as showing signs of stress under increased load. The executive summary of that same report described it as operating within acceptable variance. A maintenance log from a crew in the Southwest flagged a cooling mechanism as requiring immediate attention before any load testing. The project timeline document, which she had reviewed and signed off on, listed load testing for that same region as scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, with no notation that the cooling issue had been addressed. She pulled up 3 more reports. She found the same pattern in each one. Specific concerns documented at the field level softened or reframed somewhere between the field and the boardroom, arriving on her desk as something that didn't require her to pause. She sat back in her chair. She had not been lied to, exactly. Every document she had signed was technically accurate, but there was a version of events she had been shown, and there was the version that lived in the actual field reports, and those 2 versions were not the same story. She had made a $900 million decision based on the first version. She closed her laptop. She thought about Andre Bellamy standing at the door of the conference room, turning back, looking at her. That chair isn't against you. It's just to remind everyone in this room that not being allowed through the door doesn't make a person's life worth less than the people sitting inside. She had dismissed it in the moment as emotional rhetoric. Now she wasn't sure it was rhetoric at all. The call came on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks into Andre's suspension. A technician named Brooks from the Southern crew, a young guy 2 years on the job who had worked under Andre the previous summer, reached him on his personal cell. His voice was tight. "Pine Hollow substation," Brooks said. "Load test went wrong. Cooling failure on Unit 7. 2 guys are trapped in the relay room. Management is calling it minor, but Andre, I was there last month. I flagged that unit. Nobody touched it." Andre was in his truck and driving before the call ended. He had no active credentials. He had no official reason to be there. He drove 40 minutes to the Pine Hollow facility with Samuel's hard hat on the seat beside him, and when the site supervisor tried to turn him away at the gate, Andre looked at him and said, "I know this station better than anyone you've got on that radio. You can waste 10 minutes arguing with me, or you can let me help." The supervisor stepped aside. The problem, once Andre got eyes on the relay room layout, was exactly what he had expected. The main cooling line for Unit 7 had failed, which had triggered an automatic lockdown on the adjacent relay room. Standard safety protocol. But it meant the 2 technicians inside couldn't get the door open from either side without manually isolating the secondary circuit first. The secondary circuit wasn't on the standard emergency diagram. Andre knew where it was because his father had shown him years ago on a job site nearly identical to this one. He walked the rescue crew through it step by step. 3 minutes later, the door opened. The two technicians who came out were pale and damp with sweat. One of them was a younger man Andre didn't recognize. The other was Roscoe Tate. Roscoe was 58 years old and had been with Sterling Gridworks for 31 years. He was 7 months from retirement. He had worked on the same Southern Circuit routes as Samuel Bellamy back in the early days, and he had the kind of quiet, unshakable steadiness that came from 3 decades of doing dangerous work without letting it make you reckless or afraid. When they brought him out, Roscoe didn't go straight to the medics. He walked to Andre first. He took Andre's hand in both of his and held it. "Your father pulled me out of a bad situation once," Roscoe said. His voice was rough. "Different kind of trouble, a fire that broke out on a line crew job up on Route 9 years before you were old enough to work. Your dad got me clear before the whole section came down." He looked at Andre steadily. "I never forgot it. 22 years ago, and I still think about it." He tightened his grip. "Today makes twice I owe your family." Andre couldn't speak. He just nodded. Camille Sterling had arrived on site 20 minutes earlier, called in when the incident was first reported. She was standing 15 feet away. She heard every word. She looked at these two men, 158, 142, both in work clothes, one having just pulled the other out of a room that could have killed him, and she understood something she hadn't been able to articulate since the board meeting. The empty chair wasn't a political statement. It wasn't a protest tactic. It was a record. It was the physical evidence of a kind of knowledge and loyalty and sacrifice that had been passing between these men for decades, entirely invisible to everyone on the 31st floor. She drove to Roscoe Tate's house that evening. She told herself it was a professional obligation, CEO checking on an injured employee. But she didn't bring anyone from HR with her. She didn't bring a prepared statement. She drove alone and knocked on the door of a small yellow house on a quiet street, and Roscoe's wife, Eleanor Tate, let her in. Eleanor was a compact, deliberate woman who moved around her kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been managing a household on a working-class income for a very long time. She made coffee without asking if Camille wanted any, and set it in front of her without ceremony. There was an empty chair at the kitchen table. Camille looked at it. Then she looked at Eleanor. "My husband is alive," Eleanor said before Camille asked. "I know that. I thank God for that every day." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "But I keep that chair empty for the ones who didn't come home. There's 3 men from Roscoe's old crew, wives I know, good women. They've got a chair like this too." She looked at it the way you look at something you've made your peace with but never stopped feeling. Some families, that's all they've got left. Camille drove back to the city in silence. She didn't go back to the reports that night. She sat in her apartment and thought about 3 women she had never met sitting at kitchen tables with empty chairs and a company that had generated record quarterly returns in the same years those chairs were emptied. The next morning, Grant Voss asked to meet. He came to her office, closed the door, and sat down with the measured composure of a man who had navigated worse situations than this and was confident he would navigate this one too. "We have a path forward," he said, "but it requires getting ahead of it." His proposal was straightforward. Issue an internal statement attributing the Pine Hollow incident to an isolated equipment failure unrelated to the concerns raised by Bellamy. Move the project forward on its current timeline with minor safety addendums that could be processed without delaying the schedule. And formalize the separation from Andre Bellamy, not just the suspension, but a full termination with a settlement agreement. "It's clean," Grant said. "It protects the company, it protects the project, and it removes a variable that's already caused unnecessary disruption." Camille looked at him. "He pulled 2 men out of that relay room yesterday. He trespassed on an active incident site without credentials," Grant said. "We could have a liability conversation about that too if you'd prefer." He shifted forward slightly. "Camille, I've kept this company alive through things that would have ended most organizations. I know what happens when you let a single disgruntled employee become the story. You don't want that. The board doesn't want that. And frankly, the workers don't want it either, because if this project dies, their jobs go with it." He wasn't wrong about the numbers, she knew that. The board would move against her if she delayed the project without cause they could present to investors. Grant had built something real over 20 years. He wasn't inventing the risk. But she had also read those reports now. All of them. She told him she'd consider it. He left looking satisfied. Andre was called into an HR meeting the following Tuesday. The settlement offer was significant. 18 months of salary, full continuation of benefits for 2 years, a neutral employment reference. The agreement required him to make no public statements about Sterling Gridworks, its projects, or any internal safety matters. The HR manager, a careful woman named Patricia, who had clearly been given her talking points by someone above her pay grade, slid the document across the table and placed a pen beside it. Then Grant walked in. He sat down across from Andre without asking permission and looked at him the way you look at a problem you've decided to solve. "You're a single father," Grant said. "I respect that. I mean that sincerely." He nodded at the document. "That number covers your daughter's health insurance for 2 years. It covers the back payments on your mortgage. It gives you time to find something that's a better fit." He paused. "Don't turn this into a principle when what it actually is your daughter's security." Andre looked at the document. He looked at the pen. He thought about Maya putting the bigger piece of bread on his plate. He thought about his father's handwriting inside a hard hat, "Don't ever let them speak your pain for you." He thought about 4 names he had written on strips of tape and stuck to the underside of a chair. 4 names that no one in the 31st floor conference room had ever said out loud. He thought about Samuel Bellamy, who had filed the right reports and followed the right procedures, and died on a Tuesday in October because someone had decided the inspection could wait. He put his hand on the pen. He held it there. Then he set it back down. "I'm not poor enough," Andre said quietly, "to sell the seat of somebody who already died in it." Grant looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and left without another word. The termination letter was issued by end of day. The internal memo that accompanied it described Andre Bellamy as having engaged in conduct inconsistent with professional standards, including unauthorized entry to a restricted incident site and the dissemination of unverified safety claims that negatively impacted team morale. It was sent to every department head in the company. It was a document designed not just to end his employment, but to define how he would be remembered inside the building. Andre was escorted out by a security guard he had never met. He carried a cardboard box with a few tools, a photograph of Maya and Samuel's hard hat. It was raining. Maya was waiting by the front gate. Her school had let out early because of a water main issue, and she had taken the bus to meet him. She was standing under the overhang with her backpack on, watching the security guard stop her father at the entrance. Andre managed to keep his face steady. He smiled at her. He walked to where she stood and took her hand. She looked at the box. She looked at him. "Did they take your chair, Dad?" He stopped walking. He looked down at her 9-year-old backpack, too big for her frame, asking the exact right question without knowing it. "No," he said. He pulled her close. "Some chairs nobody can take." That evening, Camille went to the maintenance floor. She didn't know what she was looking for. She told herself she was following up on an operational matter. She walked through the quiet of the after-hours bay, past the workbenches and the tool racks and the lockers with last names stenciled in black, until she found the corner where Andre had kept his gear. The chair was still there. She turned it over, strips of tape along the underside of the seat. On each one, a name written in careful block letters. Samuel Bellamy didn't come home from his last shift. Luis Ortega got hurt because a warning got buried. June Parker lost her job for reporting a safety fault. Ray Dugan died before he got to retire. And below all the names in smaller letters, "For the ones who warned us. For the ones we didn't hear." Camille sat down on the concrete floor of the maintenance bay. She read each name twice. Then she pulled out her phone and searched for Samuel Bellamy in the company's incident archive. She found the file in 11 minutes. She found the inspection order that had been deprioritized to make room for a project deadline. She found the field reports that had flagged the cooling system at that station 4 months before it failed. She found the sign-off that had approved moving forward without completing the inspection. The signature at the bottom belonged to her father, Robert Sterling, founder of Sterling Gridworks, the man whose portrait hung in the lobby downstairs, whose name was on the building, whose legacy she had spent 14 months trying to honor and expand. She sat on that concrete floor for a long time. Then she went back to the conference room on the 31st floor. She brought the chair with her. She set it across from her own seat and sat down facing it. She read until 4 in the morning, field reports, archived complaints, suppressed safety reviews, internal memos that had never made it past middle management. And at the very bottom of Samuel Bellamy's file, a scanned copy of a letter he had written to his family before a difficult job. "If something happens," Samuel had written, "don't let our boy grow up thinking a working man's life is just an operating cost." Camille put the letter down on the table. She pressed her hands flat against the surface. And she wept not for her reputation, not for the project, not for any version of herself she was afraid of losing. She wept because the wealth her family had built, the name above the door, the life she had inherited and accepted and never once thought to question, all of it had grown in the soil of warnings that someone had decided not to hear. She wept because a 9-year-old girl was giving her father the bigger piece of bread, and she had almost signed a document that would have made sure that little girl never knew why. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 a.m. Camille had not slept. She had changed clothes in her office bathroom, made coffee from the machine in the break room, and sat back down at the conference table with Samuel Bellamy's letter beside her laptop. By 7:30, she had read every document in the archive she could access. By 8, she had made 3 phone calls, one to the company's outside legal counsel, one to the head of the Independent Safety Commission she had worked with on a previous regulatory review, and one that she did not tell anyone about. At 8:55, she walked into the boardroom. Grant was already there along with 6 of the 8 board members, 2 attorneys, and the company's head of investor relations. The room had the tight, prearranged feel of a meeting where most of the conversations had already happened somewhere else. Coffee was poured. The document was already printed and centered at her seat. Grant opened without preamble. "We have a narrow window to get ahead of this," he said. "The Pine Hollow incident is already getting outside attention. 2 workers, a trespassing violation, a terminated employee with a grievance, that's a story if we let it become one. This statement controls the narrative." He gestured toward the document. "It's straightforward. We confirm the incident was an isolated equipment failure. We acknowledge Andre Bellamy's unauthorized presence on site, and we affirm the project continues on schedule with updated safety protocols." He looked at her. "It's what the board needs. It's what the investors need. And frankly, Camille, it's what you need." She looked at the document. She looked at her own name printed at the signature line. "I've been reviewing the field reports," she said. "We've all reviewed the field reports, not these ones." She opened her laptop and turned it toward the nearest board member, a woman named Harriet, who had been on the Sterling board for 11 years and had a background in risk management. "The unedited versions, from the field supervisors directly. I pulled them from the archive last night." She looked around the table. "The warnings about Pine Hollow were documented 4 months ago. They were not acted on. That is not an isolated equipment failure. That is a documented, traceable failure of process. The same kind of process failure that killed a Sterling Gridworks employee 22 years ago." The room was quiet. "Samuel Bellamy," Camille said. "His son is the man we terminated yesterday." Grant set down his pen. "Camille, there is a signature in the incident file from 22 years ago," she said. "It approved moving forward without completing a flagged safety inspection. I think most of you can guess whose signature it is." She closed the laptop. "I'm not saying that to assign blame to anyone in this room. I'm saying it because I signed off on a project that was heading toward the same outcome for the same reasons. And I didn't know it, because the information that would have told me was being consistently softened before it reached my desk." She looked at Grant. "I don't think you did that out of malice," she said. "I think you did it because you have spent 20 years keeping this company alive, and you have made 1,000 judgment calls, and most of them were right, And somewhere along the way, you stopped being able to tell the difference between protecting the company and protecting yourself from a difficult conversation. Grant's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. If you sign that document, he said, we move forward. If you don't, the board will move to suspend your executive authority. Today, in this room. He wasn't threatening her. He was explaining mathematics. Is that the outcome you want? Camille looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the empty chair she had carried up from the maintenance bay and placed against the wall before anyone else arrived. No one had mentioned it. Everyone had noticed it. I want to ask everyone in this room a question, she said. Not as a rhetorical exercise, a real one. She looked from face to face. How much did we lose? Not financially, not on paper, but actually lose to get the kind of silence that let this happen twice. Nobody answered. She stood up. The workers were outside on the sidewalk in front of the building. There were 23 of them. Some Camille recognized from site visits and facility reviews. Most she did not know by name. They had come in their work clothes, not as a coordinated statement just because most of them had come straight from a shift or were about to start one. Each of them was standing beside a folding chair. On each chair, written in marker or paint or tape, was a name. They were not shouting. They were not holding signs with slogans. They were just standing there in the gray morning light in the rain, each one beside a chair that bore the name of someone who could no longer stand there themselves. Andre was at the end of the line. He was not leading it. He was not positioned as its representative or its face. He stood where anyone else might stand, with Maya beside him, her hand in his. He had not brought his own chair. He didn't need one. The chair with his father's name on it was already inside the building. Camille saw them through the lobby glass. She walked to the front entrance, opened the door, and stood in the rain for a moment without speaking. Then she said to the security desk behind her, "Please let them in, all of them." The senior guard looked at her. "Ma'am, the board is still in session." "I know," she said. "Let them in." The board members were still in the conference room when Camille walked back in with 23 workers behind her. The attorneys visibly recalculated something. Grant Voss went very still. The workers carried their chairs and stood along the walls. They didn't sit. They just stood there holding the chairs with the names on them, and the room, which had been full of people in expensive suits making decisions about a world they managed from a distance, was suddenly full of a different kind of presence entirely. "I'm not signing the statement," Camille said, "and I'm not putting the project forward on its current timeline." Grant started to speak. She held up her hand. "I want to be honest with you about why," she said. "Not because I've decided to be an activist, not because I want to blow up what we've built, but because I read a letter last night written by a man who died 22 years ago, and he asked in writing to his family that his son not grow up believing a working man's life was just a line item. And then we employed that son for 11 years and terminated him for trying to make sure we didn't repeat the exact same mistake that killed his father." She looked around the room. "I don't know how to build anything worth building on top of that without first acknowledging what it is." She turned to face Grant directly. "You've kept this company alive through things that should have ended it, and I know that. I'm not dismissing 20 years of work." She kept her voice even. "But you protected the company by deciding over and over again that the risk to the people at the bottom was an acceptable trade-off for the security of the structure at the top. And you did it so many times that it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like reality." She paused. "I can't continue in that direction, so I'm asking you to step down. Today." The room was completely silent. Grant looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his face that she hadn't expected, not anger, but something older than anger. Something that might have been the very first flicker of a question he had never allowed himself to sit with. He picked up his folder. He stood up. He looked briefly at the workers along the wall, at the names on the chairs, and then he walked out without speaking. The door clicked shut. Camille looked at the board. "I need a vote to ratify 3 actions," she said. "First, immediate suspension of the project pending a full independent safety review. Second, removal of all non-disclosure agreements tied to prior workplace injury settlements. Those agreements will be voided, and the individuals who signed them will be notified. Third, the establishment of a permanent field safety council with binding authority, including worker representatives from every operational region who have the right to halt project phases if they identify unmitigated risk. Harriet spoke first. You understand what the suspension does to our Q3 projections? Yes, Camille said. I do. Harriet looked at the men and women standing along the walls of the room. She looked at the names on the chairs. She looked at Camille. Call the vote, she said. It passed 5-2. After the board cleared out, after the attorneys had gathered their papers, and the investor relations director had left looking like a man trying to calculate the exact weight of his own silence, Camille asked everyone who remained to pull their chairs to the table. They did it slowly, without ceremony. Field technicians and linemen, and a woman named June Parker, who had lost her job at Sterling Gridworks 6 years ago for filing a safety report, and who had driven 4 hours that morning because someone she'd never met had written her name on a piece of tape under a chair. They pulled their chairs up to the boardroom table where an hour earlier, a $900 million decision had been moving through its final approval stage, and they sat down. There were water glasses on the table. Someone passed them around. Andre was the last one to take a seat. Camille was standing at the head of the table. She looked at him and said, I thought leadership meant sitting at the top of the table. I spent last night understanding that it means knowing who isn't at the table at all. Andre didn't respond immediately. He looked at her with the careful expression of a man who had learned not to spend trust faster than it was earned. Crying in a room alone doesn't change a system, he said. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. The people in this room have been through the process before. They've filed the reports. They've had the meetings. They've been thanked, and then watched nothing change. He looked around the table. What they need isn't a better apology. They need the power to stop the thing before it happens. That's what the Safety Council is, Camille said. Then it needs to be real authority, not advisory, not a committee that can be overruled by a budget meeting. Binding authority, she said. It's in the resolution. He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded once. Andre returned to Sterling Gridworks the following week as Field Safety Director, a title that had not previously existed in the company's org chart, and that Camille had created specifically because no existing title captured what the role actually required. He would be the direct liaison between field crews and executive leadership, with a seat at every project approval meeting and the authority to escalate safety concerns directly to the board. His first act in the new role was not a policy memo or an organizational chart. It was something much smaller. He went to the maintenance bay. He picked up the chair. He carried it to the conference room on the 31st floor and set it in its usual place, the empty spot beside the executive seat where he had first placed it the day the whole thing began. Then he turned the chair over. He peeled the strips of tape from the underside one by one, slowly reading each name as he removed it. Luis Ortega, June Parker, Ray Dugan, and then Samuel Bellamy. He held that last strip of tape in his hand for a moment. Then he walked to the main conference table and pressed it flat against the surface near the center, right where anyone who sat down would see it. Not underneath something, not hidden, not pending review. Just there, visible, permanent. Samuel Bellamy. 3 months later, the Safety Council had already halted 2 project phases, one in the Eastern District, one at a station almost identical to Pine Hollow, on the grounds of unresolved field risk. Both times, the independent review confirmed the concerns. Both times, the project resumed only after the issues were resolved. The chair was still in the conference room. At the first full project approval meeting under the new structure, a new board member looked at the empty chair and asked about it. "We have field workers in the room now," he said. "Isn't the chair redundant?" Camille looked at Andre. Andre looked at the workers seated around the table. Then he looked at the new board member and said, "There's always someone who can't be here. Someone in the hospital. Someone who already died. Someone who knows something important but doesn't think they're allowed to say it. That chair doesn't represent the people in this room." He paused. "It represents the ones who couldn't make it." The board member nodded slowly. Nobody suggested removing the chair. Andre got home late that night. The house was quiet. Maya had fallen asleep at the kitchen table over a library book, her cheek resting on her forearm, hair fanned out across the page. He stood in the doorway looking at her for a moment. Then he moved carefully into the kitchen, lifted her gently, and carried her to her room. She stirred, but didn't wake. He pulled the blanket up around her shoulders and turned off her lamp. Back in the kitchen, he looked at the table. The empty chair was still there. It had always been there. It would probably always be there, not as absence, but as memory, as the thing his father had taught him before he had words to understand what he was being taught. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the photograph he'd brought from the office. Samuel Bellamy, 40 years old in his work uniform, standing in front of a relay station on a bright afternoon, squinting into the sun, smiling a little. He set the photograph on the empty chair. He stood back and looked at it. He heard Maya's voice from the hallway, small, half asleep. "Dad?" "Yeah." A pause. "Is Grandpa in the meeting now?" Andre looked at the photograph, at his father's face squinting into a sun that had set a long time ago. "Yeah," he said quietly. They finally heard him. He stood there a moment longer. Then he reached over and turned off the kitchen light. The chair stayed in the dark, not empty, not forgotten, just there, the way it had always been, holding the name of a man who had done everything right and still didn't make it home, and whose son had carried that name all the way to a table where it could finally be seen. Some people spend their whole lives in rooms where the decisions get made without them. Andre Bellamy didn't fight for power. He didn't fight for recognition. He just refused to let the people who couldn't speak for themselves be forgotten, and that quiet refusal changed everything. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you've lived through, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about ordinary people who held the line when it would have been so much easier not to, subscribe. Every single story on this channel is for the ones who are still holding the chair.